Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We welcome you once again to the airwaves of Salam Media on this Wednesday evenings. It is Wednesday nights with myself, Inayat Wadi, and always wonderful being in the company of our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms of Salam Media, where we take a look at issues and more importantly, taking a look through panel discussions. This is obviously a detailed discussion that we are having. And appropriately, last week, we've seen the State of the Nation address, and we've seen a tremendous amount of response to the State of the Nation address by the President of the country, President Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, clearly, it was quite a heated address. In fact, at the beginning of the address, actually, and we've seen what had happened with the likes of the economic freedom fighters and also the African Transformation Movement. Their leader, Vuyolwethu Zungula, was ordered out of the house as well. But the key issue here is to unpack what President Cyril Ramaphosa had to say and what do political parties really think about what he had to say. Now, two things that stood out, and that has become a major talking point amongst the many, and one being the appointment of the Minister of Electricity and the state of disaster that was announced at the State of the Nation address. And what does this actually mean? And also the whole question surrounding people like Pravin Gordhan and their position, and also looking at the Department of Minerals and Energy as well, the minister himself. And South Africa in a state of a critical state at this point in time, mainly as a result of Eskom, but there are many, many other issues. The whole question surrounding gender-based violence, the question surrounding joblessness, and just poverty, hunger, despair. All of this are the hallmarks that are defining the South African nation at this point in time. And we've seen at the beginning of the address, the president talk about what doesn't define us as South Africans. And he spoke about the mountains, and he spoke about the oceans and minerals underneath the ground. There was just so much he said at the beginning. And right towards the end of his address, he asked himself the question as to why is he in this position. Now, to unpack all of this evening, we are joined by three political parties from the African Transformation Movement. We've got Vuyolwethu Zungula, we've got Ahmed Munzoor Shaik Emam, the National Freedom Party, and on the telephone, we are joined by Mkhuleko Hlengwa from the Inkatha Freedom Party. I see right on the top of the screen, Vuyolwethu Zungula. Good evening to you and welcome to the show.
Evening to yourself, evening to my colleague, Mr. Shaik Emam, and all listeners.
Yes, and Ahmed Munzoor Shaik Emam, assalamu alaikum and welcome to you as well.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And good evening to you, comrade. I hope you're well. And yeah, we are here.
Well, the comrade from the Inkatha Freedom Party has just sent me a message saying that he was not briefed properly regarding the interview. He's currently on the bus going home. He should be ready after 25 to 30 minutes. So hopefully we will try and get hold of him towards the end of the show. But let's just look at, we're starting off with you looking at the SONA. Now, obviously you made history. SONA 2023, the first person who was asked to actually leave the house. And I don't know, what went through your mind? What were you thinking when you were ordered out of the house?
What was going through my mind was how, undemocratic our parliament is slowly becoming. Because parliament is an institution of different parties, so there's always going to be robustness and debate in the House. However, the rules of parliament ought to guide the conduct of the Speaker, presiding officer, and all members. Therefore, the fact that we differ politically should not be seen as an excuse or as a reason to act undemocratically to prevent a member of parliament who is elected by the people to be there in that house and engage in the proceedings of parliament. So that is the issue that we're having as the ATM. And if we are going to talk about how other countries, for example, go to Zimbabwe, members of the opposition parties there, it has gone to an extent of them actually being arrested for no reason, being ill-treated for no reason, being beat up by the police for no reason when they're holding political rallies. However, it does not start there. It starts off by having a hostile approach to the debate and the dialogue and the frank discussions that are brought by members of the opposition in parliament. So I think that is the biggest issue, because the point of orders I was raising, it was not me personally raising for my own self. It was in accordance to the rules of parliament, because Rule 66 states any member must not interrupt another member. And we clearly saw how the speaker was interrupting the speakers or the members of the EFF, including myself. I may not be a member of the EFF, but I cannot just sit back and allow them being mistreated by a speaker that is abusing her powers. Similarly, any sound member of parliament should have taken exception to me being removed, because it was me on Thursday. But who knows who will be abused or mistreated in the next coming parliamentary sitting. So it's very important for opposition parties as well to speak out on the abuse and the victimization that presiding officers use against opposition simply because they have the majority.
Well, thank you for that, Vuyo. And I just like Ahmed, Munzoor, Shaik, Emam's thoughts on the whole question surrounding the democracy of Parliament, and more importantly, in terms of how opposition parties are actually seen, especially at an event like so now when you are looking at a joint sitting of Parliament.
Well, I think, first of all, we talk about being a democratic country and a democratic society. But when we talk about implementing democracy, then we fall short. Now, we have rules, and I always said that the rules in Parliament are very weak. That's the first thing. But very importantly, I think our presiding officers have a problem in terms of the way they implement these rules. Now, you cannot, the rules are very clear. If somebody said you can, raise your concern as the presiding officer, you can ask them to withdraw. You've got to give them 3 opportunities before you decide to remove them from the House. But you cannot take a unilateral decision to get an entire organization, first of all, removed because 1, 2, 3, or 4 members of that particular party may not be behaving or conducting themselves in a way that's suitable to the presiding officers. So that's the first problem we have. And I've always found that there's a weakness, and I don't know whether they become emotional or they just can't handle the heat, but they tend to want to exert authority when they should not be doing that, because, we are there. All of us have constituencies. We represent people. We have a responsibility, and we should be allowed to participate if we want to call this a democratic parliament. And I think, but when it comes to the abuse of the rules of the House, I think you're going to have to deal with the rules itself. The rules, as far as I'm concerned, it's been amended recently, is still very weak. But where we have a problem, and I can tell you what may have led to this, unfortunately, my colleague here bore the brunt of it. But by virtue of the fact, I think, where the EFF has been making public announcements, we're going to disrupt it, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. I think that perhaps has led to some kind of discussion that may have taken place prior to the sitting. And that's the impression we got after that. And that they might have had, and that is the process they agreed that they were going to follow, which we don't know about as members of parliament. And when we got there, I think, in fact, from what I've heard, there was a 30-minute time frame that was given. And true as God, you can see that in the 30 minutes, that's when the speaker lost control and decided that she wants to evict members from the House.
Well, we're not going to focus too much on the shenanigans that were obviously playing out. But just to come back to the SONA itself, now we've seen, and I'd like to bring Vuyo into the discussion first, is looking at the SONA, the address in itself, and there were huge expectations in the build-up to the SONA, considering that we as a country are at a very, very critical juncture, ESCOM just being one of the many, many problems and challenges that this country is faced. And there were huge expectations, there were high expectations. Now, just reading some of the reaction and the debates that had taken place and the reaction from opposition parties, the address didn't seem to go down too well within opposition circles. In fact, to a large extent, I think there has been disappointment, Vuyo.
Definitely. Almost all of the opposition parties are rightfully critical on the SONA, because a SONA ought, the basic principle of SONA should be the president needs to give a speech that is saying to the nation, I'm aware of these challenges. Now, if you are going to have a president that is out of touch with the realities that are faced by millions of the people, then definitely whatever that is going to propose as a solution will not be rational, will not be well thought, because how do you propose solutions to a problem that you do not even know about, or you are out of touch with the lived realities of the people? Now, I can list just 3 issues that are on the top of people's worries. The first one, it is the unemployment. Recall that the unemployment levels in our country are the highest in the world, particularly for young people. That the unemployment feeds to poverty. It also feeds to the second problem of crime. We've seen how kidnappings, mass shootings, extortions, murders are on the increase in our country. And the third problem is the problem of energy, which is also not, the problem of energy, which is linked to the state of other SOEs like your post office that is currently retrenching 6,000 workers. Therefore, the problems of ESCOM speak to the problems of the governance of our country. How well does the government actually govern our SOEs? Therefore, if you're going to have a government that takes no responsibility for their actions, obviously you are going to have a pushback from opposition parties. Because if you look at the issues of unemployment, there's nothing that was said there that would give rise to any comfort that the president is going to deal with crime. Also, when the issue of unemployment, also with the issue of crime, you'll pick up that with the number of mass shootings that are taking place in our country, there's not even a sense of, even employing the police reservists that we have all over the country, to fight against crime. And it has always been stated, one of the biggest problems, it is the ratio of a police men versus the people that they need to police. That is another problem. The problem of the SOEs, for example, when it comes to ESCOM or energy, they want to turn a technical problem, an engineering problem, to be solved by politicians by creating of a political office, which is the Ministry of Electricity. Whereas you need sound engineers, you need people with capable experience, because that is what we need. We do not need politicians to want to be at the forefront of each and every problem. Same thing with COVID. You had to have medical doctors, you had to have people that experience when it comes to diseases, to play a leading role, not have politicians leading the charge. The same thing here. You need to have engineers leading the charge, not have politicians. So that is why, if you listen to SONA, all of the opposition parties, they are speaking in one voice. And you can even see, even the ANC itself, when they are trying to defend, they are trying, but the realities of our country speak for themselves. So that is, in our view, the real state of the nation. What the opposition parties were presenting is the real state of the nation.
Thank you for that view. And just to bring Ahmed into the discussion, Ahmed, Munzoor, when I look at the opposition parties, obviously they've actually gone hammer and tongs. They've actually ripped into President Cyril Ramaphosa to the extent that even calling for his resignation from certain quarters. And this is now in debating the SONA. And again, a number of issues, and we will unpack these issues, with regards to some of the major decisions that were taken, the one regarding the Minister of Electricity, the state of disaster, and the like. But just coming back and looking at Cyril Ramaphosa, looking at his performance to date in the build-up to the SONA and what he had actually said at the State of the Nation address, has there been disappointment from your side?
Well, definitely, to a very large extent. I think his address was a repeat, or 80% of it was a repeat of the previous SONA. Now, let me just talk about a few issues. First of all, Eskom's problem is more than the national state of disaster. It's more than money. All the national state of disaster will do, you will bypass all the procurement processes, which will create another conducive environment for corruption and looting, which is what happened during COVID with the PPE scandal. Eskom's problem has been, first of all, they did not look at the demand, the increase in demand. Remember, in 95, your population was 40 million. Today, it's 62 million. That's the first thing. Secondly, they did not maintain them. Thirdly, remember that they gave packages to the skilled staff and did not transfer the skills. Then you've got those evergreen 30 and 40-year contracts at exorbitant prices that are continuing. Then you've got sabotage, theft, corruption, all these things. So there's a whole lot of contributing factors to why Eskom is where it is. And in fact, the president himself, which I reminded him recently, withdrew the maintenance budget when he was in charge of the war room at Eskom as the deputy president. So that's Eskom's problem. In terms of the job, I can tell you now, I'm not sure, and that is why at one stage, unfortunately, when you got 5 minutes only in parliament, there's only so much you can say. President is talking about the manufacturing sector. In our view, it is at a standstill. If you look at the imports into the country, the particularly the textile, leather industry, plastic industry are all almost shut down. And very little or nothing is happening as far as that is concerned. Foreigners, and I'm going to tell you this, the Chinese who are bringing in all these imports into the country go one step further in our country. They're now even manufacturing it. And they don't employ any locals. They're employing foreigners in this country at 60 Rand a day. But we have a 4,000 Rand a month minimum wage. Nobody does anything about that. That's the other problem we are sitting. Local government is collapsing. There is no delivery of services because all political parties want power and control. The coalitions are failing because when you're not getting enough through the corruption and looting with one political party, then you're ending up with the other one. That's the problem, and that is exactly why you won't solve that unless you can have a more credible and transparent procurement process in the country. Now, if you talk about the Minister of Electricity, clearly what the president is saying, that all the ministers he's got when it comes in this case to energy and the public enterprises, they're not good enough or they're not good for purpose. So he's putting a Minister of Electricity. Who are they going to answer to? Is the Minister of Electricity going to answer to the Minister of Corporate Governance, to the Minister of Public Enterprises, Minister of Energy, or to the President? So I don't think we're solving the problem. And if you've noticed that a whole lot of responsibilities are now being given to the office of the presidency, which means there's no need for all these other portfolios, because what are all these ministers doing? But again, I want to say the problem lies in maybe there needs to be a better oversight mechanism in the office of the presidency, because ministers are not performing. But let me also say, how much can you blame these ministers? Because they are being put in the deep end too, because before they even settle in, they are moved into another portfolio. But the DGs, the DDGs, the CFOs are there for years, and they are not performing. So you can see that the problems that we look at the state of education in the country. Now, the president talks about 30,000 fund is going to fund in the TVET colleges. 60% of them drop out in the first year alone. Now, 30% of those that passed mathematics and went to colleges drop out in the first year too. So what kind of engineers is the president going to be producing? Because he said he's going to rely on the engineering council to provide engineers for Eskom. But look at the quality of education when at the age of 10 years, children can't read and write. But we are concentrating on 80% pass rate, which is just over 50%. But let me tell you what we don't know. And after talking to different people, and particularly those that have been marking in the matriculation examination, did you know that if you got a 60% pass mark, it means you only got 40%? Because there's a 20% that's allocated for work done during the year, and automatically that average is given to everybody. So if you pass to 30%, it simply means you only pass to 10%. Now, can you have a 30% pass mark in the country and provide skills? Now, look at the money you're spending with TVET colleges, but you're not addressing the skills needs of this country. It's because those TVET colleges do not have the expertise to be able to attract those based on the skills needs of the country. What the institutions are doing based on the availability of lecturers, they're providing a curriculum on that, not on the skill needs of the country. So I think we've got a serious crisis in the country, and only if government accepts that there is a problem and now we need to find solutions, then only would we be able to do something. I'll go and touch on one more matter for you. Let's look at the issue of tax. 13% of the people pay tax in this country, and you want to take the blood out of the bone of the 13%. But I can tell you that if you walk around with me in every street all over the country, do you know the number of people, including foreign nationals, that don't pay taxes at all? Why don't you go out and get more taxes, reduce the tax on that overburdened 13%? There'll be more money to spend, more money in circulation, and you'll have economic growth. But they're not willing to do that.
Well, we thank you for that, Ahmed Munzoor. And just to bring Vuyo back into the discussion, now the point that Ahmed Munzoor made is the president not accepting there is a problem. And one thing that I personally observed, and I'm sure many observed at the SONA, was accountability, where this message didn't come strong from the president, taking accountability for all these problems that Ahmed Munzoor is talking about for you.
Indeed. The president is refusing to lead. He's refusing to take responsibility for the failures of his government. He's refusing to take the responsibility of his own cabinet. You'll recall that there's a minister who left for the USA May 2022. It's been more than 7 months now, where you have a minister of employment and labor, also doubling as a minister for public service. Now, the Minister of Employment and Labor is already failing in his own portfolio, but the president is refusing to employ a capable minister for the other one. He'd rather have another minister act in that position so that he can deal with whatever political consideration that he has. Whereas a person that is taking South Africa seriously would ensure that you do not have ministries that are incapacitated, you do not have ministries that are basically dysfunctioning, ministries that do not have political heads. There's absolutely no reason for a ministry not to have a political head for over 7 months. That one, it is not acceptable. But at the root of these problems that we face, perhaps one of the questions that we need to ask, obviously looking at the conduct and the actions of the president and other people, is that do these leaders or do these people that are occupying these positions of being presidents and ministers actually have the interest of resolving these problems? Because if you look at the nature of the problems that we face in our country, you do not even have a sense that there are people that are actually serious, there are people that are concerned about actually solving those problems. I'll take, for example, the issue of illegal mining. We've had illegal mining for years in our country, to an extent whereby there were even 8 women that were brutally raped in our country. But ask yourself a question: has there been any thorough intervention by the government to say we've got an elite police unit that we've dispatched to go around the illegal mining hotspots to actually deal with the illegal miners? Look at the issue of the porous borders. And it is known for a fact that when people come to the country illegally, they pose a security risk. And even before we go to the security risk, when you're talking about governance, you need to know that You've got 60 million people in South Africa. They are spread across the 9 different provinces, the regions, the local municipalities, and the wards. Therefore, when you do your planning, you know that these 60 million people, these are the amount of resources that you are going to allocate for education, for healthcare, for policing, etc. But when you've got millions of undocumented people, you can't even govern correctly, because you can't even say for each and every 2,000 people, you are going to make sure there's a police station. You can't even plan to that extent, because you have people that are undocumented living in the country. You've got also the problems that are emanating there, which is the problems of criminality. We saw how it happened even with the likes of Bushiri. He commits a crime in South Africa. The only way that he's going to evade accountability and justice is to just leave South Africa, because he did not come here legally. There is no way in which we can make sure that he stays in our country and faces justice. Recently, there's a doctor from Kimberley, illegal immigrant, comes, practices illegally in our country, rapes a 17-year-old, gets to be arrested. After being arrested, when he needs to come to court, the magistrate gives him bail. From there, he does not come for the subsequent subsequent court hearings. Now, meaning South Africans will never receive justice if they are victims of crime from undocumented non-South Africans. So the point that I'm making here is that if you're to observe the conduct, observe the lack of action from the government, they point to one conclusion, that the leaders in government currently in our country do not have the political will to resolve the problems, are basically not interested. Look, for example, in Kenya, there was a problem of the infrastructure, which is vandalize your rail infrastructure, your cables, which is something we also see in our country, whereby electricity cables in some communities are vandalized. Currently, Metro Rail, PRASA cannot function properly because the rails have been vandalized. And the source of that vandalism is that the scrap yards are used as a distribution point for all of that rails and cables that have been stolen. But what action have we seen from government that would give confidence that government is actually dealing with the problem? Because in Kenya, within 2 weeks after the government of Kenya picked up this is a problem, they immediately place a ban on the operations of all scrapyards. For that, within 2 weeks, they said no scrapyard must operate. And from there, they got to the root of the problem and they dealt with it. Now they're moving on, dealing with other problems. Come to South Africa. How many years have we heard about the issues of cable theft, of vandalism of our rails? So the point that I'm making here, and I want to get across, is that the government does not have the political will to solve the problems. That is the unfortunate reality.
Well, thank you for that, Vuyo. And also, Ahmed, Munzoor, when one looks at the president, and I alluded to this in my introduction, talking about what defines us as South Africans, and he spoke about resilience, and yet, he spoke about hills and valleys and rivers and minerals and all those things that don't define us. But these are the resources of the country. They do define us because they define the prosperity of a nation that has not enjoyed all what that the country owns in terms of resources. That is the one issue. And the second issue as well is when we look at the president, this time around, thankfully, he didn't speak about bullet trains and smart cities and all those pie in the sky and dreams. But again, just in terms of confronting reality. And this is why I see that many opposition parties are actually calling for his head. They are saying that the country is actually worse off now in the last 5 years than what it was even under the previous president, Jacob Zuma.
Well, let me start off by saying I think one of the root causes of why we are where we are today is because of the internal factional fights of the ANC. And I think to a very large extent, their concentration is more on the internal fights rather than governing the country at this point in time. And in fact, what happens in the ANC is infiltrating into many political parties as well. It has something to do with the coalition governments and dysfunctional governments. That's another problem that we seem to be having. But I must agree with you that, and I want to give an example on Muammar Gaddafi. Even the oil, the revenue that was generated from the oil in Libya was directed to the citizens of that country. We have all these natural resources in this country that is in the control of the outside world, in the West particularly. And that is a problem that we have. We have some of the most arable land in the world. Africa as a whole has got 44% of the most arable land, but they have a problem when it comes to food security. And South Africa is heading there very fast. Soon there will be no food security in this country as well, I can tell you. I can also tell you that NHI that they want to introduce, I can tell you today it's going to fail because the emphasis is on introducing it to score points and get votes, but we are not ready. It's a brilliant thing. We need it in the country. We are not ready for it. If you think we've got a problem with energy in the country, wait till we have a problem with water. You can still survive without electricity for a couple of hours, but how are you going to survive when you don't have water? The president talks about, and I agree, I think he's out of touch with the reality, to be honest. It's either his ministers and them are lying to him, misleading him. That's why maybe he needs an oversight committee even there. But you can't be taking all these portfolios and bringing them all under the ministry of the presidency. It's not going to work. You got a 54% water leak, water loss at any given time. So all these projects that you're talking about, how is it going to help when 54% of your... Remember, it was 27% 9 years ago. It's 54%. What is it going to look like in 10 years' time? So you can see the problem that we are actually going to face there. But let's talk about the issue, particularly when you talk about natural. And look at land. What stops a government, and all those governments, whether they're in local and provincial or national at this point in time? We have a massive crisis. Cape Town has got 575,000 people on the waiting list for homes, right? And it's the same scenario all over the country. All this land is allocated under the control of local government, then provincial, then national. What stops the municipalities to say, hold on, we have got 100,000 people in our municipality that don't have no homes. Let us subdivide the land in our municipality to the community that lives here, give them their dignity and their identity back, and then in a couple of years, and you break it down. This year, I'll do 500 houses or 1,000 houses with water, sanitation, and electricity. Following year, I'll do another. What stops you? But you are running after expropriation without compensation, which the Constitution already provides. For me, it's just a delaying tactic. So you got the power. It is in your hands. You can give back to address the inequalities because we still remain one of the most unequal societies in the world. Why are you not doing that? So the problem is, I think that government is immersed in their own internal factional fights, which means that you can't even identify leadership because that is not the criteria. You've got to identify yourself with people that are aligned to your faction. And often when you do that cadre deployment, which is why all our state-owned entities, over 800 of them have failed. The problem is you are now going to take people that are aligned to your camp rather than those that are best able to do the job. That is the reason why we are sitting. And I want to agree with one thing, that what government lacks at the moment is leadership. And that's why we have repeatedly said to him, why don't you have a more inclusive government? Get us all political parties, civil society, legal experts, financial economists, everybody. Close the doors for a week. Have an imbizo. Let's ask ourselves where we were, where we are, and where do we want to go to? Because I know we have the expertise, the capacity, and people with integrity outside of politics. There's no room for them.
Well, Vuyo, that inclusive government that Ahmed Manzoor speaks of, is that ever possible? Because, we know about Jobs for Pals, we know about cadre deployment that has been taking on for a very, very long time. And with the creation of this new Ministry of Electricity, and I see Gwede Mantashe refers to this minister as a project manager, because this is exactly what he's referred to him as. And what is his role going to be? And we're looking at possibly duplicating or even triplicating the effort. And there was a time when Cyril Ramaphosa promised to scale down the various ministries and the portfolios, but it seems like the elephant is actually getting bigger and bigger. And at the same time, even looking at Praveen Gordhan, for instance, is he going to be playing a different role? Because we know of the unbundling of Eskom that has been on the cards for a very, very long time. And how is the president actually going to coordinate these three critical portfolios that is having a disastrous impact on the country?
I think, it goes back to what I stated earlier. It appears that the president, including his ministers, do not have it in their interest to actually get the country working. They do not. It's not in their interest, for example, to get Eskom to work, deliver energy, to provide energy to the people. You'll recall that the president has got business interests in the energy sector. We know that is one of his Shanduka companies is also an IPP company. Similarly with his brother-in-law, Patrice Motsepe, Jeff Radebe, etc. Therefore, in light of that interest, those business interests of his relatives, even himself, even his business associates, it's not in his interest to have a functioning Eskom, because once Eskom is able to function optimally and service the needs of the people of our country, there's no need for IPPs. If you look at the destruction of our SOEs from, Denel, SAA, the post office, for example, let us look at the issue of the post office. Currently, there's going to be a retrenchment of over 6,000 workers. And you check that the time post office was actually working optimally. A lot of people were employed there. Even the SASSA grants were distributed via the post office, and meaning the money that the government is paying now to a private company to distribute the grants, it was paid to a state-owned entity, meaning the money of the government was circulating within the government. In other words, government was not losing money, but government was actually using another state-owned entity to fulfill its purpose of distributing grants. But this deliberate destruction is actually paving the way for SOEs, for privatization, or for the private sector to enter into the market that is enjoyed by the government. Now, once that happens, is that you are going to have companies that do not exist, to service the needs of South Africans, companies who exist for profit, that are going to go there and dominate that space. And when they dominate that space, jobs are going to be lost. We are going to see, the destruction of our SOEs as much as we're seeing now. So we can speculate as much as we want to, but the actions of the government, it is actually showing that they do not have the interest. In fact, they're having an opposed interest that let these SOEs be destroyed so that their friends in the private sector are able to capture that the markets that are enjoyed by the state. Also, if you're to look at the question of having a government that is comprised of people from different parties, that would be the most rational thing to do, because currently you find that there's a lot of talent in the opposition parties, there's a lot of skills in the opposition parties. Even when you are debating, you observe some of the debates that, yes, 1 or 2 minutes we're going to use to highlight what the problems are, but we spend more time as opposition parties offering solutions. So even from listening to the solutions, the current executive, it is it is failing to even listen to a solution from the executive. How much more from when it comes to taking a member of the executive, a member of the opposition and putting them in the executive? Because the attitude that they are showing is that we don't care about what we say as an opposition, no matter how well thought it is, no matter how no matter how it proves to solve our problems. They are only caring about one thing: is that we as the ANC must appear as if we know it all, we've got the solutions to everything, and we do not want to appear as if we don't know what we are doing and we are taking advice from the opposition. That is their attitude, and it is a destructive attitude because opposition parties, in their true nature, do not exist to just oppose. They call out the executive for wrongdoings, but they offer solutions as well. However, if you are a smart ruling party, you are going to use the ideas from the opposition parties. However, in practice, the government does not have the attitude of wanting to work with opposition parties, starting from, including them in the cabinet, including them in some of the discussions. Look, for example, some of the meetings that the president has with the leaders of opposition parties. He only comes there to pretend as if he's consulting, whereas he's already decided what he's going to do. So he uses that platform to actually rubber stamp his decision that is already taken. So that is problematic.
Yes, and Ahmed Munzoor, Praveen Gordhan in May 2022 made a statement that ESCOM was not in a state of disaster. And comes so now 2023, and the president announces a state of disaster. Now, this is a complete about turn. The second issue is in declaring the state of disaster, you are appointing someone like Dr. Dlamini Zuma, who was a state of disaster in herself in terms of the how she had managed the COVID-19 pandemic and the state of disaster at that point in time. And yet, again, sometimes one wonders that within a political party, there is no honor amongst politicians themselves. Now, this was a woman that went up against President Cyril Ramaphosa as far as the Pala scandal was concerned. She actually voted against him. Yet, placing confidence in a person like her, again, to oversee the state of disaster.
Well, first of all, it depends whether she'd be live the position. Time will tell. There is expected a reshuffle. We don't know when it is coming. So it falls under corporate governance, not necessarily in Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. It just depends how long she survives. But remember, the ESCOM, if we're talking about a state of disaster and what Minister Gordhan had said in 2020, we are again out of touch because in 2007 already, concerns were raised about the state of ESCOM and the energy crisis that will unfold in years to come. And government did not do anything about it. It doesn't need a rocket scientist to know your population is increasing. How is it that all government officials, everybody know that when you ordered them a car in 2023, then the car will only be used for 3 years and then you must, through wear and tear, you need a new car. Why not the same with ESCOM? So to be honest with you, they knew that they're going to run into trouble. They did very little or nothing to plan ahead. There was lack of vision on part of government in dealing with the crisis. Now, the other problem with ESCOM is, why is South Africa, out of everybody else in the world, in so much of a hurry to get rid of your coal power station, when indeed we have coal supply for 200 to 300 years, some of the finest quality coal. You're going and borrowing 151 billion. Only 3% of that is in the form of grants or funding. You are going to borrow to come up and deal with renewable energy. But the very same United States of America and others that are giving you are relying on coal. The United States has said that they will eradicate coal in 2054. South Africa is starting to shut them down right now. China, is building more and more coal power stations. Korea, South Korea, where I've just come back from, is doing exactly the same. France has just recommissioned the coal power plant. But South Africa, wants to move from one extreme to the other without an alternative and without ensuring there's sustainable energy right now. And the question is, what is the hurry? Why are you rushing into renewable energy? And I don't have a problem with you going that route. But you need to have an alternative, which you don't have currently. And yet you want to move from one extreme to the other. So it's very suspicious. In fact, this morning we had a presentation from National Treasury. Post Office is insolvent. Denel is insolvent. They talk about women empowerment, women-owned businesses, youth-owned. Believe me, all have underperformed. That's how bad it is. And if you talk about the president even talking about, I just want to get onto the issue of gender-based violence that he talks about. 91,000 children gave birth to children last year. As that on Christmas Day and New Year's Day, by 12 o'clock, children as young as 12 years old gave birth. And we think it's okay. If you don't deal with the root cause of these dysfunctional families, you'll never sort out the issue of gender-based violence. Because no rapist or murderer is born a rapist or murderer. He's somebody's son. He had a mother, he's got a father, So what went wrong? Where did it go? How? What are we doing to prevent that? And I must agree, the levels of crime in South Africa, let me tell you, it's beyond the police. A police officer earns 13,000 rand after deduction, 7,000. The moment he puts his uniform on, he's a target already. You think he's not going to be corrupt? Let me tell you what is happening. The president is bragging about that you're employing more and more police officers. But all the experience and skilled ones are leaving the force, like my colleague alluded to. They are leaving the force. They're going into the private sector. Even like the city of Cape Town, law enforcement is taking them all on with better benefits. So you're losing the skills. You're bringing in new people who know nothing. A detective sits with something like 200 dockets. Can you do justice to 200 dockets? You're giving them 400 rand danger allowance, and you think they're not going to become corrupt. So, and look at the influx of people into the sky. If there's one minister I want to assure you that's really working at the moment, is the Minister of Home Affairs. He's inherited a department that is dysfunctional. But if there's one minister that's doing his best and making changes, is that minister. But I can tell you the rest of them are just just unaccountable. And the president does not have the power. Can I say it again? He's got this fear. I can't deal with that because he's going to jump to the other camp. That is what happens when you have camp-based politics. And that's the difficulty that is sitting on. Look at SAA. Up to today, we members of parliament, he's a leader of the party in parliament, I am too. We don't know what is the story with SAA. I've even asked the question to Minister Godan. Tell me, is anybody in any political party, including the ANC or anybody else, directly or indirectly involved in this 51 rand sale of SAA? He said, not that I'm aware of. Can you see his answer? The same SAA that your CEO previously, Coleman Andrews, sold your entire fleet of airplanes that was pre-owned. He sold it to his own company and leased it back to SAA. Can you imagine? And nothing has happened about him. You know, the BEE that we've introduced, the BEE is supposed to deal with the inequalities of the majority black community. But let me tell you all what it is doing. It's creating a handful of middle-class black millionaires and multimillionaires, all at the expense of the majority of the people. So I think it's time to go back to the drawing board. And I think the solution is a more inclusive government and bring in the experts so that we can sit together before it's too late. At the moment, the direction we are heading is a disaster waiting to explode. Your youth unemployment alone is going to tell you that, you know, they say an idle youth is a destructive youth. And you can imagine what is going to happen. President has given no solutions to all the problems that we are facing currently. Absolutely nothing concrete. And I think the problem is there is no accountability by his ministers. They come perhaps telling him this is happening and that is happening. He's accepting that information and coming out and presenting it to us. He needs to deal with it. But can he deal with it given the fact that they are a divided political party that's fighting for survival? It's a matter of survival there. That is what's happening. But it's impacting on the country and its people.
Yes. Also, we are talking about survival and the stark reality that is facing the ANC and in all likelihood will happen is looking ahead at the 2024 elections. And there is all this talk about a coalition government at national level. And looking at your parties like the ATM, looking at parties like the NFP, now we all hear about this minority bloc. And where do the minority parties fit in, and how do they align themselves in the political landscape, and more so in anticipation of a coalition government? Just your thoughts as the ATM on the coalitions, and how you would fit in.
Coalitions, particularly for next year, they're a definite reality. The ANC is definitely not receiving more than 50% of the vote. And, we might not have enough time to dwell much deeper into it now. But we also need to look at the role that the IEC plays when it comes to elections. We note that majority of the presiding officers in the voting stations are teachers that are members of SATU, a SATU that is a workers' union that is affiliated to COSATU, a COSATU that is in alliance with the ANC. Therefore, we need to scrutinize and examine whether that relationship is it leading to free and fair elections, whereby we can safely say there are no shenanigans that are happening in the voting stations, whereby votes of the opposition parties get to be lost, and those voters, those ballot papers are going to be seen lying on the streets. So we need to scrutinize also the IEC, because in my view, and I'm going to be very honest here, we know that the government is corrupt. We know that when it comes to the contracts, they are very corrupt. We know that they use the state of disasters, to loot the state coffers. Now, what we are not carefully scrutinizing, the processes that enable them to be able to have access to the state coffers, because the voting, which is the IEC, is critical. So there's no way, in my view, you could be corrupt as a government when it comes to how you handle contracts of the state, but there's no corruption, or you don't attempt to be corrupt on the processes that either make you government or do not make you government. So we need to have time whereby we examine that particular aspect. Now, the opposition parties, or the small, the forum of opposition parties, or the block of small parties, we need to be principled in the sense that government has to be there, but we need to have a very strong voice to say, here are the principles. The biggest issue, that is why the coalitions at a local government are failing, because they are personality based, they are based on access to resources. They are not based on principle, they are not based on service delivery. Because if that was the case, if we're all saying we're serving South Africans and want to better their lives, therefore, you don't hear this vote of no confidence, that we have in across the entire country on the mayors, that you see that they are based on principle. They are based on access, on the fight to access to resources. So to turn around South Africa, there needs to be principled approach, particularly from the side of the leaders of opposition parties, because we can't allow ourselves to get the same culture as the ANC, because the ANC, it is beyond repair. Once you're an ANC member, your DNA is a DNA of corruption, of self-interest, of self-enrichment. Therefore, every decision that you take as a member of the ANC, you have one thing only in mind, and that thing, it is looking out at your own interests, and you don't care about the interest of other people or of the nation. Therefore, opposition parties need to be careful not to be sucked in that character and the culture of the ANC that has proven to be destructive to our country.
Thank you for that, Vuyo. And Ahmed, Munzoor, I just would need your thoughts on coalition, and how do you see the NFP fitting into a coalition scenario?
Well, first of all, let me tell you, I think the problem is bigger than just ruling and opposition parties. In fact, I think it would be more effective if amongst the opposition parties, the minorities form a bloc. Because I want to tell you, like the ANC has got a lot of their own internal factional fight. The DA has got a similar problem right now. And the EFF is believe me, has got a similar problem. If not, it's going to be bigger. And you're going to see it in due course. I believe the ANC will not get their 50%, but they will govern for one more term through the minorities. And right now, I can tell you, even the NFP has been infiltrated. Okay. There is factions that are supporting the ANC and overthrowing. And my colleague is correct. It's all about financial resources. Some of them are voting with the IFP. I can tell you there's bags and bags of cash that is changing hands. This is what it is all about. It's not about the people. So I think in the interest of the country, maybe the minorities in the opposition, because I want to tell you now, opposition parties and the bigger ones particularly don't care about the smaller ones. No, no, no. All they want to do is use the smaller political party. I'm going to give you an idea example. Let's take the EFF, not that I wanted to talk about it. They is the one that removed Mbeki and brought Jacob Zuma, got rid of Jacob Zuma, brought Cyril Ramaphosa, then want to get rid of Cyril Ramaphosa. Now you're not consistent in what you're doing because, look at the problems that they're creating in the South African society. And to a very large extent, while the ruling party wants to use smaller parties, and they're doing that, the opposition parties are also using us for their own benefits, not because they care about us, because we are still opposition. So I think we need to be very, very careful about that. And I can tell you, all they need to do, and we've seen it, give you one seat, give you one position, give you one minister or one chairperson or whatever it is, and you are sold, you go on your history. And that's why the ANC will still govern in 2024. I've given them 30 years originally, and I think the 30 years is coming now to an end. But they will survive only because of the smaller parties. But the important thing is that South Africa is not ready for coalitions. You can see it. It's an absolute mess. And the only people that's paying the price for it are the people on the ground. And because it's not about delivery of services, it's not about the people, it's about who can control the financial resources. That's what it is all about. So you can imagine your metro, your financial hub in Africa is in trouble. Tshwane is in trouble. eThekwini is in trouble. So you can see the problems we are sitting with. So yes, coalition government is a good thing. But I think the minority parties in the opposition must come together and don't let even the opposition use us, because that's what they're going to attempt to do as well.
Well, I think that is going to be a huge topic on its own, and possibly, the two of you, we would hold you to another discussion on this particular aspect as well, on coalition governments, but that sometime in the future. Unfortunately, time is of the essence. So Vuyolwethu Zungula from the ATM and Ahmed Shaik Emam, the NFP, we certainly do appreciate you taking time out and being part of this panel discussion on Wednesday nights with myself, Inait Wadi, right here on Salam Media. All the best to both of you.
Jazakallah.
Good night, comrade.
I mean, well, that brings us to the end of part one of tonight's edition of Wednesday Night with myself, Inait Wadi. We come back and our focus is going to be this Easter week, Al-Aqsa week, and we've got quite an interesting discussion. We've got an interesting lineup coming up, so that will take place straight away after this.